the day if the department directors can't answer you right at that point in time. So, but if there's anything else you need, please let us know and we'll get any information throughout this process. So with that, I'll kick it over to Pat.
Thank you. Hello, everybody.
Hey, Pat.
Hi. Hi. I wanted, as I begin the library's presentation on the budget, to note that Dan Sloan is here. Dan is the treasurer of the library board, and so he's the chair of the library board's finance committee. And the library board is an administrative board, so as we were working through the mayor's budget directions, Dan and the finance committee were in on the conversations about those. And then also the library board does take an official action to forward the library budget to the mayor. So I wanted you to be aware of Dan's presence here and his service to the library board. Also, our business manager, Paul Jones, is here, and he may help me out with technical questions that may arise. So thinking about Lincoln City Libraries and how we fall into some of the overall goal areas for the city, we see that we have a strong role to play in terms of equitable and inclusive city, in terms of what the library owns, in terms of the programs that we offer, in terms of creating a space for people within the library. One of the things I often say about the library is that we succeed when people from all walks of life are using the library and are together in our buildings or together using our materials online. Certainly we relate to vibrant economy and quality of life. I love being a library director in a town that values education, and when this city thinks, what does quality of life look like? It looks like education. We have a role to play in terms of lifelong education and learning. We're very aware of that and think of that often as we think of how do we serve the city. And then also just strong and resilient city. We have a lot of faith in education and information and thinking, how does a city remain strong? It's partly because its people are well informed and seek out that kind of information. So we feel like the library ties into many of those areas. How we serve the community. So thinking about quality of life, as I mentioned, this city really values education, and so when we think about quality of life, we're thinking a strong library. Libraries are among the few places that offer free computer and internet access, and we take that responsibility seriously also, and we have pretty good geographic representation throughout the city and in terms of our hours providing access to those services. Also, we are committed to promoting the importance of reading aloud to children. So as we get into our budget, you will see that we are taking a step or two to make sure that our community presence remains strong. We are in a period of presenting some budget cuts to you, so one of my goals is, as we do that, not to just turn inward, but to stay outwardly focused in terms of what the library offers to the community. Then, as I mentioned again, equitable and inclusive services, book collections that reflect a variety of experiences, and we're also very proud of the number of different groups with whom we collaborate and partner throughout a year at the library. So those are some ways in which we pay attention to those city goals. I was trying to think of some examples of the scope of library services. So these are from our most recent fiscal year report. And in terms of visits to the libraries, there were over 1.14 million visits to libraries last year, and 3.07 million items circulated, and that's print and electronic. So that's kind of a scope of use if we're looking at our big numbers throughout the library system. And then during that fiscal year, we had over 118,000 in attendance at library programs. So this year with the pandemic is so different for us in that summer is usually controlled mayhem at the library. And it's not unusual to have hundreds of children attending a program and a lot of people in the library at one time. So we have been doing things online. We've been doing pickup service. We're making our programming available in different ways, say online again, but it's a different kind of way of doing service. So next year, our program attendance number will be quite a bit different, frankly. Thinking about what we've been doing during the pandemic, We have not had our buildings open to the public, but we have been doing pickup-only service. So basically, people place holds on items, or they call the library and say, I want this book or that, and then we prepare their items for them. Basically, we get them all checked out to that person. Then they just come to the library and call when they're here or there. And we have a system where we have a touchless drop-off. So we set it outside for that customer when they call, and then they pick it up. And that's the process we've been using through the pandemic. We offered a lot of virtual story times and book groups, and frankly, we've learned a lot about how to do online programming better and better, so we're putting that information to use. And then we did really bulk up our collection of online downloadable resources, knowing that there were quite a few people who were shifting to downloadable materials throughout the pandemic while the libraries were not open to the public. We didn't see a lot of savings then during the pandemic. We had a few smaller savings in things like our security guard contract, maybe in supplies, but in general, our people were hard at work within the buildings. We used part of the time, of course, to support that pickup service, but we also were able to use the time to do things that we hardly ever get to, such as inventorying our collection, which is hard to do when we're open to the public. And so we had projects like that. We're also, after a hiatus, accepting returned materials now. So a lot of those are coming back, and that's requiring a lot of staff time to keep up with those materials also. Now, as we sort of move into what our budget looks like, the question is, what is some of the data that we use when we're thinking, okay, what would we do if we were, for instance, asked for creating a scenario of, say, a 4% budget cut, maybe a 6% budget cut in the second year of the biennial. So this is a chart of the number of library staff that are part of our system. And the year on the left is 2000, and the baseline is 90 here. So I want you to have that kind of scale as you look at this chart. So in 2000, we had just around 100 full-time equivalents, and then Isley and Walt Branch Libraries opened in 2002, and we added a good number of staff. But then at about 2007, 2008, 2009, there were budget cuts. Bennett Martin's hours were pulled back. We stopped staffing the lower level of Bennett Martin Library. We made some other cuts where we moved from having staff perform certain tasks to contracting for some of those tasks. And our staffing number was significantly lower. It went up a little bit in the last couple of years. Actually, Mayor Gaylor Baird was an engineer of shifting some Keno funds to allow the library to add some positions that provide system-wide support. Facilities person, a building superintendent, as well as a public information specialist. Both of those positions have more than pulled their weight in terms of support for our whole system and the work that they do. So our library runs pretty lean. A question that I get sometimes is, how does Lincoln compare to other libraries of its size or libraries in cities similar to Lincoln? And I would say in many ways we're medium. We don't have the kind of per capita support that cities like Topeka or Madison, Wisconsin have. On the other hand, we're not at the lowest part of the chart either for per capita support, but we do run pretty lean, and I have to say I'm proud of all that we're able to accomplish with the funding that we're given. Lincoln is very much in the middle, I would say, as far as the number of employees that we have. So this chart is important because of what we see on this slide, and this slide is the same as page 130, I think, in your budget book, that shows funding sources as well as expenditures. So on the chart on the left, you see the total funding sources, and what you see is that city property tax is 80% of our funding, and then we do get county support through an interlocal agreement. So people who live outside of Lincoln but within Lancaster County are welcome to use the library free of charge. They provide tax support for that. Then some of our other main funding source is the Keno Fund, which we do receive an allocation each year. We don't really have fees to adjust here in terms of library use. People think of overdue fines usually when they think of a library fee, and we do have those, but we no longer charge overdues on youth materials, and there's sort of a balancing act where if we raise fees, then people check out less. So we can't do a direct increase there. Then looking at the expenditure chart, personnel accounts for a lot of our expenditure. Where it says capital outlay and equipment, that's the budget that we use to buy materials. So books, DVDs, CDs, and also downloadable materials and electronic things come out of that. I won't go too deeply into this, but you may have heard me talk before about the challenge of paying for downloadable materials. They are very much in demand. They keep our library website hopping with business, but they are expensive. So as we're looking at what is it that people are seeking from the library, where are their holds placed, we still want to be addressing the demand for downloadable materials, but it is a real challenge to run the gamut of print book, large type book, audiobook on CD, downloadable audiobook, downloadable ebook, and get all of that covered. Publishers don't give us the deal on downloadables that they give us on print books. So libraries tend to get like a 40% discount on print items. We do not get anything like that for a downloadable book. We saw really healthy increase in use of downloadables during the pandemic, as I mentioned before. So this is something that we've been paying a lot of attention to. And frankly, we'll be watching to see, coming out of the pandemic, do people who switch to downloadable stay with downloadable, or will they be switching back to print once things sort of get back to normal, whatever normal will look like? So as we're looking at cuts to the library budget, looking at expenditures, it's clear why typically what we're doing is looking at staff primarily in terms of where cuts can be made and making adjustments following that sort of a cut. So thinking of the library budget, the cuts that we've identified are closing all library facilities 1 day per week, either Saturday or Sunday, and that does result in the elimination of 5.5 full-time equivalents. It impacts 6 people. A couple of those positions are vacant. We are eliminating 1 position in our virtual services department that provides support for the system. It's a vacant position. We are going to decrease our materials budget by $25,000 each year. And then we do have 1 addition to our budget, and that is our part-time Read Aloud advocate, which continues our community campaign about reading aloud and make sure that the library remains out and about in the community. So we look at this, and as I've said to some of you before, we're not putting these forward because we think it's a great idea to run a library this way. What we're saying is if our budget got cut, here is how we would manage that. As I said, we run pretty lean, and so we don't have really a lot of fat to cut out, frankly. I want to make clear that this is about laying people off, but as we do that, we realize that we can't just absorb cuts in positions. The decrease in our hours is a reflection of the number of staff that we have. And one way that we look at this is we don't want to eviscerate or totally cut our materials budget and keep hours, because essentially what you would have is a library whose doors are open, but without the materials that people want and that bring people in. Similarly, having the library's doors open, but not having a level of staff where we can continue with programming and doing the things that get families into the habit of using the library. So where we are putting our energy is keeping buildings open as often as possible, but also being very clear that we want to keep the features of the library that the community really demands and responds to. So as we looked at our schedule, one of the things that is the case is that typically significant savings come from a full day of closure. So that's partly why we were looking at it that way, and that's how we ended up with suggesting that some libraries close on Saturdays and some close on Sundays. And as I said, by pulling back the library hours, even with that's cut to the materials budget, we will remain appealing and relevant. So we'll still provide that strong programming, have that strong computer and internet access. We have very good internet access, actually. Have the things that people are seeking in terms of materials, and really continue to provide that community leadership about the importance of reading aloud to young children. We can't overemphasize the importance of doing that. Our ultimate goal really all of the time is to provide the very best library service that we can with the taxes and other support that we're given. And for this year, we believe that this is how we will respond to what's before us in terms of the budget. I did just want to mention briefly that in the capital improvements budget, the library does have a few projects, and the ones that are prepared for the first funding are some significant maintenance projects at Isley and Walt libraries, both roofs and parking lots. So those are our newest libraries, but they'll be 20 years old pretty soon, and so we're needing to make some investments in their infrastructure. And now I'm just curious to know what questions you have and what I might be able to answer for you, or what information I might be able to pull together for you later.
Does anyone have any questions for Pat? We have about 10 minutes available. Councilwoman Ward.
Thank you. Pat, you may have told me this before. Does the Library Foundation provide any financial support
Yes.
to your operating
Yes, our
budget?
foundation does provide annual support in a couple of ways. Now, that's not typically included within our budget because it isn't necessarily funding that we can count on, that we can depend on, but they provide an annual gift based on the income that comes in on their funds and on their fundraisers. And then we also receive money from our foundation because they manage our annual book sale. So that money typically goes back into materials. It might buy books that support our programs for young children, and they might purchase materials that we simply buy to put into our collection.
It's all coming back to me now. You hadn't mentioned this to me before. Is it reasonable to think that some of those monies from the foundation might support not closing some of the library facilities as we move forward with that consideration?
The question that I would want to ask if we were doing that is the funding source a reliable enough funding source for us to have a position within the library dependent on it? And at this point, the kind of funding that we've received isn't at that point. It's typically used for special projects, and if we move toward a central library project, it would, they would be really working hard on a capital campaign, and that's the kind of funding that they have provided for us in the past.
Understood. Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Councilwoman Washington.
Thank you. Pat, I have a couple of questions. If you were to bring back the day at each of the libraries, and this is for later to answer, what percentage would you still be able to cut from your budget? My concern is really just education and access, and I'm glad to hear it's not a weekday when students really do go from school to the library and your homework helpline, but I have some concerns about that. So I'd like to know how far down you could cut and still give us the weekends.
Okay, I would like to give that some thought, so
Okay.
I will get back to you with an answer on that. And you mentioned something that we've realized as we were thinking through how do schedules work. A lot of people are concerned about, can young people walk to a library? Is there one within proximity? What we find is that most of the time when young people are walking to a library is after school, and it tends to be middle school age children. So 3 of our libraries are quite near to middle schools, and that was certainly one of our concerns as we considered our schedule.
Yes.
Any other questions for Director Leach? All right, thank you so much for coming out, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks to all of you as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Coming up next, we're going to have urban development.
Here he comes, walking down the hall.
Thank you for coming, Director Marvin. We got about 30 minutes to talk about the urban development budget.
We'll go through the 30 minutes, and I'll try to do it in 20, and then open it up for questions if you'd like.
Perfect.
So thank you for giving us an opportunity to present our budget to you. We're the Urban Development Department. This is a kind of a chart. The director would be me, but it's a team effort. There's a number of people in urban development that work together. We've split ourselves into about 3 different divisions. The assistant director would be Dallas. Livable Neighborhoods would be run by Wen. Administration is Pat. Economic Development or Economic Opportunities, again, would be Dallas, and then included into the Economic Opportunities would be parking operations for the city of Lincoln too. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about livable neighborhoods as far as the first division there. And the way this presentation that I put together is going to try to be what I've learned from giving presentations. Some people are visual, some people like numbers, so we're going to try to put both of them together. Numbers first, though, because I think numbers are important. There are 2 budgets within the livable neighborhoods. There's the CDBG budget, and then there's the home budget. And between the home and community development block grants, because we like to speak in alphabet jumble soup here, community development block grants and home provide about $4 million worth of resources. We do a variety of different things with that, and this group just met and approved our budget, I think 2 weeks ago, which itemized all the different elements that we use those funds for. So when I was in here the other day, we shared some pictures of some of the projects that we've done. We're very proud of the work that we do, and here's a before and after picture that you can see on a project that was done in Lincoln. And here's another one, again, a before and after picture. Shared the black and whites with you a couple of weeks ago. Color makes it really pop. So these are really great projects that we've done with all different aspects. But just to give you an idea, here's a map that Kurt did in our office. It shows you where we've done first-time homebuyer dollars. And I think sometimes people get the impression that the Urban Development Department is the downtown department. And that's not true. We really have a reach that goes throughout the community. On first-time homebuyer dollars, we've spread throughout the community, and this is helping people get into their home their first time with down payment assistance. We also do emergency lending. And a side story that I'll tell you is I was probably like 3 weeks on the job and got a phone call from somebody, got routed back to the director's office for some strange reason. And it was a man who had lost his wife, and he had 2 children, and his air conditioner was broken, and he needed something to be done right away. And we had people out there, and we had a check cut, and we were helping that person. So there are things that touch you when you work in the Urban Development Department because we touch people. We have a new initiative we're working on with affordable housing, and Wen has been working in that area, and we're trying to roll out 2 aspects of it. One, and what you'll see in the picture here, is you'll see the yellow area, which would be an area of Lincoln that has the highest number of complaints for building code violations. And the next slide, the one in the middle, kind of comes out of our Affordable Housing Action Plan. And what I've repeated to council numerous times is that, yes, we need to create more additional housing, but we need to be able to create additional affordable housing units, but we also need to create more variety of housing because that will create migration within the marketplace as well. And you can see this from the graph, and I know it's small, but the plan's been distributed to you all and you've been able to look at it. But what it shows is at the low end of the market there is a shortage. There are surpluses within the marketplace, and if we can create some variety of housing, that we think that we'll also be able to create some movement. So we want to be able to do all aspects of that. And so the 2 initiatives, which you've been briefed on, one would be our efforts on codes violations, and we're going to try to get a coordinated effort there. We've got staff taking that's involved in a plan to look at creative ways that are being done around the country to develop better codes compliance. And so we're going to undertake that. And then we are going to try to address financing challenges for creating affordable housing, and that would be another aspect that we will be working on as well. Person that I work with, Mr. Carlson, once said, and I think this is a pretty good thing to say, which is you can't have substandard housing be our affordable housing program. And so that's what we need to address. There's a challenge here, but we all recognize that substandard living isn't an affordable housing option. So there are going to be a third component to this is how do we come up with financing tools on the rehab side of existing housing. And if it's rehab costs that's only borne by the landlord, we know what that's going to do to rents. So we need to be creative and come up with some additional options to address that as well. Economic opportunities. I think a lot of you know what economic opportunities amounts to. These are the tax increment financing projects that are brought before you. We'll have some more coming your way. Those individuals, Dallas and Hallie and Ernie, those individuals are part of the general funded budget. So those dollars, as you can see, this is not a department that uses an enormous amount of general fund dollars, roughly $900,000. But what are the projects that are brought forward? We brought an innovation campus hotel in the last year. I'm told that there's going to be a crane going out there, and that'll be under construction. Brought a student housing project. Both of those were $30 to $40 million projects. Oops. The Westo Sports Facility was approved by the previous council, but we made some modifications and did some work on that, and that opened in the last year. Obviously, they've been challenged by the COVID issues. Cotner and P was brought here. They are working actively out in that area. Block 4, they're already getting mobilizing equipment and doing some work on that property out there, and that project was voted on by this body, I think, in January. We had a condo project that's over in the Haymarket, a smaller project, but they're doing the rehab work in that as well. Looking to the future, we think Block 65 is a transformational project in the downtown, and Pershing Center, we're closing up on an RFP process that we've had. We've had some responses, we've had a committee put together, and we're reviewing those proposals as we speak. So on the administration side, what I like to tell people is that nothing moves unless you've done the math and figured out how to pay the bills and all of those aspects. And the administration end, which is headed by Pat, they deal with a variety of different things, and none of these projects would happen unless they do the due diligence, the math, and pay the bills, because unless you pay the funds for it, nothing's going to happen. And real estate, research statistics, there's a myriad of things that have to be done with all of the federal funds that we get, and Pat runs that aspect of it. TIF administration, all of the releasing of funds and the tracking of the dollars on the TIF projects, all of those happen. But there's BID projects, and BIDs, there's a whole host of issues that have to be tracked on those in terms of letting bids out, all the different elements that go along with running the business improvement districts. And again, as we talk about how do we get rehab dollars in, the administration end will probably be involved with the neighborhood improvement district. So it's a coordinated effort. All the different departments that we have, economic opportunities might have brought forward Hepburn Square. Hepburn Square helps provide affordable housing, certainly a livable neighborhoods element goal that we have, but it doesn't happen without people like Hallie or Ernie working to help develop and craft a plan and negotiate that with a developer. And then at the back end, it doesn't happen unless we have TIF administration capabilities to follow that project from beginning to end. Parking. Parking is actually the largest department that's within the urban development, certainly from a revenue perspective. And so if Parking constructs two different components to it. These would be surface lots and joint public agency facilities, and then our parking garages. Parking garages are the largest revenue item of those two. And then the JPA facilities and the surface parking lots are the second largest as well. Where are we headed, and what are some of the projects that we've got underway in parking for the 2020-2021 period? We expect to be wrapping up on the Eagle Parking Garage. I think our latest estimate that would be open probably in the February to March time period of next year. We have another parking garage that is the fourth garage along the line of Pinnacle Arena Drive. It would service the Block 4 housing project that we're doing. We don't really have a picture of it other than a conceptual drawing, but it would look very similar to some of the other parking garages that run along Pinnacle Arena Drive. And we are in the early stages of getting that kicked off. I would guess, and Scott is here, he can correct all my mistakes here, but I think we're looking at probably a 2022, late 2022 opening for that parking garage. So we'd start construction sometime next year. COVID. Do we have impacts from the coronavirus and the impacts that we're having on the community? Well, other than the impacts that it has on the general fund, we have a large impact on our parking garages. So parking revenue, and these numbers are year-over-year comparisons, and I have to say some of these year-over-year comparisons of are not apples to apples comparisons. There's a few things, but obviously the delta year-over-year has been quite different. We've lost revenue because people have been staying at home, and there have been fewer transient parkers parking in our parking garage. It's had an impact on on-street parking. It's had an impact on parking garage operations. So what are the solutions that urban development brings to the table to you all to help address the budget challenges that you face? Well, one of the things that we're doing is we've got two areas in our CIP budget that we believe that at least in the short term, we can forego some funding to help address general fund revenue problems. And the reason we have confidence in that is urban development last year was kind of unique. We did an in-house project. We marked every above ground asset that's in the downtown and elsewhere, including out in Havelock and other areas. Quantified the condition of those, so we think we can delay some spending on replacement of some of the downtown assets because we've quantified that, and we can pull that up and identify those that are in most need. That doesn't slow down the depreciation of property, but we think in the short run we can better allocate those resources to those areas of greatest need and use the savings there towards the general fund. So what you'll see in the CIP booklet is you'll see the downtown public improvement line items, and we've taken a reduction in that line item there. We've also taken a reduction in the line item in the downtown irrigation system. That system's 30 years old. It's not getting any younger, and just like we have to replace fire engines and chairs and other assets, we have to replace our irrigation system. But we have done an inventory of that, and we can delay some aspects of the irrigation for the next budget year and address the shortfall there as well. And the third area where we are addressing a shortfall is on our FTE count. We have, in the past, we've had a little over 10 FTEs in the Urban Development Department that are general funded. And we would make a reduction in an FTE that's basically what we're doing is we have a retirement of a 3/4 FTE, and that would be an add back at a full FTE, so that's a quarter add, but then we're reducing a 1 FTE to take that to a 3/4 of a FTE reduction. The one issue that I would like you to think about, we're not complaining about anything, but I would like to, as a issue that I think that is not a sustainable model, would be the 1% cut that's just directed within the department. And I want to give you a little flavor of how we will deal with that in the 2020-2021 budget, and how I don't know that that's really a sustainable model to work in for out-year budgets, you know, for the next 5 or 10 years. So we're being tasked with coming up with a 1% cut, and we're principally an employee-financed department, meaning the way we would have to finance this 1% cut would leave a vacancy open. Well, we don't have a lot of vacancies. When you have 9.3 employees, there aren't a lot of vacancies. We happen to have a vacancy this year, so that vacancy will be left open to cover our 1% vacancy savings, and that would require us to keep that position open for 3-4 months. So that will be our solution to how we address that. But it isn't as though that person wasn't doing valuable work, and we've gone through the task list that that person is doing, and there are some federal requirements or state requirements that that individual needs to do that we will just have to do, but all of the other tasks that they were doing are tasks that we will just stop doing. And it's what we talked at our last meeting, the things that could send you to jail, those are the things we'll continue to keep doing. If that's the standard that we task all of our employees to do, you know, we wouldn't do a whole lot, because a lot of things aren't necessarily things that are going to be a federal or a state violation, but are still necessary tasks to do. So we'll probably suspend those for a period of 3 or 4 months, and we don't think that that will be too onerous, but it's not things that just can go away. And I don't know how we would be able to do that task with a small department year in and year out. So told finance department we're fine with the 1% cut, we'll manage to that. Just don't know that that's a sustainable model. What are some of our goals for 2020, 2021? We're going to work on implementing the Affordable Housing Action Plan. We've talked about that. We're going to administer the CDBG and ESG funds, and there's included in that are additional CDBG and ESG funds that come to us through the CARES Act that Congress passed earlier this year. There will be an additional level of funding that we will be able to provide the community, which we think will be good for the community, but that we'll be administering those. Obviously, the administration division will have to do administer the TIF pipeline and work on Pershing and Block 65 as those projects move forward. And then parking operations is going to finish up, as we've talked, the Eagle Parking Garage, and start planning for a parking garage on Block 65 at some point in the future. So let me open it up to any questions.
Councilman Christensen?
Okay, so the TIF, the 1% of TIF that comes back to your department, and you were looking at those TIF projects moving at about the same rate they have been, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where do we find that in your budget? What, do you know what line that is? Is that under fees and fines?
I don't believe so. Might be looking for Pat. I think that's probably just an internal transfer fund that goes back. It's a payment to the general fund as an internal transfer back to
Right.
So it's
Okay. Very good.
Go ahead.
That's it.
Okay.
Any other questions for Director Councilwoman Washington or Ward?
Thank you. So, Director Marvin, you mentioned those four ways you would cut. That your department would you had 4 points that you offered. Do you have I may have missed it up here. What's that total amount to? Do you know offhand, or you can get back to?
Well, I can get back to you, but I'm guessing we're right around $150,000.
Those 4 ideas.
In those 4 different cuts.
150,000.
150, yes.
Thank you. That's all I had.
I'll get the specific answer back to you,
That's
though,
okay.
too.
That's it.
Okay.
No, thank you.
Any other questions for Director Marvin? All right, seeing none, thank you so much for coming out, and
Okay,
we'll continue the conversation.
all right.
Thank you so much. Coming up next, we have Law and Human Rights for a 15-minute briefing on the upcoming budget.
Good afternoon. This may well be I don't want to say boring, I hate to have a boring presentation, but the least eventful department that you see. And if you turn to page 124 of your budget book, you'll see why. Almost all of our funds are general fund dollars. Almost all of our funds, 89%, go to personnel. And we come to you with a budget that is pretty much a stand pat budget. We're not asking for any additional personnel. We're not coming to you with any cuts as far as services or personnel. So from that standpoint, there's not a lot to talk about, except for when you look at what we provide to the city of Lincoln. I would suggest there is a lot to talk about, and I wanted to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about what we do for the city and what the budget numbers do. So let's talk first about how we're organized. We essentially have 3 different departments. We have the Civil Division, we have the Prosecution Division, and then the Lincoln Commission on Human Rights also comes under our purview. And if you look at the budget book on page 123, there's more of a visual depiction of those 3 different divisions. The Civil Division does the civil litigation, which means if we sue someone for a collection of a debt, or we're sued because of a alleged civil rights violation, or all matters, we tend to keep that in-house. Almost all of the civil litigation we handle ourselves. And when you compare Lincoln with other cities, you find differences. There are a number of cities around the state and around the country that most of their litigation tends to be farmed out to private companies. Or when you look at Lancaster County, for example, because of their insurance coverage, a lot of the times when they're sued, it's the insurance company that represents Lancaster County. In our case, we keep those cases in-house, which means we have to have the attorneys that are experienced and have the time available and have the support from our paralegal, civil paralegal, for example, in order to handle what are sometimes very complicated cases. And we feel confident that we're at the stage right now where we can do that, and can do that successfully and defend the city with a high degree of competence. Legal services, that's kind of built into the cake. We provide legal services advice, including the drafting of contracts, negotiation, to all city departments, as well as this council, as well as the mayor's office. City legislation, everything that comes before you is reviewed, if not actually drafted by our office. State legislation, and this may be something you don't think about, but our office is part of the city team, and we spend a fair amount of resources on an annual basis in looking at state legislation. Some of it, the city ends up taking a position on. More commonly, though, we review it to see if there's an impact on the city, so we have warning whether we should be considering supporting or opposing it, or just being able to be prepared if the state passes something that's going to have an impact on any particular department. Our division, particularly Margaret Blatchford, longtime attorney in our office, has the background and ability to review and see things coming, sometimes when the individual departments that are affected miss it. And so that's an important service that the law department provides. Prosecution Division, and for you, those of you that are the first time through, when we talk about the division within our office, it's a fairly hard line from the standpoint of our 6 prosecutors are not involved in the civil side of the office. They are professional, long-term employees that don't do anything but handle prosecution, and they're backed up by a very experienced professional staff that focuses solely on providing services to the Prosecution Division. And on our civil side, we don't have any attorneys that get pulled out, sent over to county court to prosecute a DWI. That allows us to be efficient and very focused on what we do. But it also means that when we're talking about allocation of services, it gives us less flexibility because we've got that better efficiency and productivity. The Lincoln Commission on Human Rights is also under the umbrella, that agency is under my supervision, at least in part, and that's not something you see in a lot of similar cities. It kind of grew organically. It makes sense, I would argue, logistically, because the logistical support for that office is provided by Terry Storr, who is also our executive assistant. And if it wasn't under the law department, you'd have to have additional clerical support for that division, which she provides very professionally and very efficiently. When we look at the citywide strategies and you look at the contributions that we make important contributions on all of those levels. And when you look at our budget, and one of the reasons why I say there's not a lot of highlights or lowlights is we're an internal service department. We exist to take direction from the city council, from the different departments, to be a service internal department to them. So we don't have any CIP projects. We essentially don't have any projects at all because our entire focus is to providing service and partnering with other departments. Prosecution Division provides immediate accessibility to members of the public that are impacted by prosecutorial functions. Plain language, what that means is if you get a speeding ticket that you don't think is fair, you can come to our office that has remained open through the pandemic and talk to a prosecutor about what can I do about it. Am I eligible for the stop class? Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes it's no, but you can get that answer and you can get it from a live person and you can get it immediately. And that's not something that you can find in a bunch of prosecution offices around the country. We take pride in that accessibility. And we provide prompt, fair, and just prosecution. We're fortunate to have a very professional and effective and I think fair prosecution staff. And that's never been more apparent than right now. When we shut down for those periods of time that the courts did, it wasn't just a matter of sending some prosecutors to work from home. It was a matter of those cases building up. And now those cases are hitting the courtroom. So we've had a bunch of trials scheduled for this month, and then next month, it's not just the trials, it's also the arraignments, the DACA calls. It's like a tsunami hitting. And it's going to be a very stressful time for our prosecution staff when all that comes together. Fortunately, that's when all of that experience is going to come to play. And I have no doubt that they will handle it very well. And it is a division that you don't hear much about. And I'll tell you, as a city attorney for the last 6 years, I can count up the number of complaints I've had and not use all of one hand about individual prosecutors, which is just amazing to me because their client base are people that have had city violations, that are by definition not happy to be there and not happy to be dealing with those city prosecutors. Lincoln Commission on Human Rights. And when you go down the list of the things that the commission provides to the city and to the community, it's things like providing assistance in recruiting and supporting a more diverse workforce throughout the city. The goal of the commission, the goal of the city, is to have a workforce that looks like the people who live in the city. It's a goal that we haven't met yet, but it's a goal we continue to work on. And when you talk about who's leading that effort, it's the Commission on Human Rights. Facilitating multilingual language access. And the pandemic provides an immediate example of where that's come in to be vitally important. When we talk about pushing out information about COVID and information about how to stay safe and information about the directed health measures, It's not just a matter of putting it out on the city website in English and assuming everybody's going to have access to that. We don't have access to all of our diverse citizens unless we can provide that information in a way that they can access it. And our commission has really been vital in the last several months in finding the resources and finding the translators that have made it more widely accessible. And I would suggest more widely accessible to our city's population than really any effort that we've ever done before this. It's an ongoing challenge, but that's what the commission is there to help with. Community outreach on issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of the latest efforts that we've been making is the career ladder implementation. And the commission recently received a grant from the U.S. Conference of Mayors specifically for this purpose, and is specifically partnering with our Lincoln Chamber of Commerce and trying to reach out to some of our newer Americans that come to this country with professional skills and experience. But because they're from Iraq or Armenia or any country around the world, those credentials, that experience in their home country, doesn't give them access to the professional marketplace here, even though we might very well have a need for those skills and education. And so that grant has been implemented in partnership with the Chamber and helping to get those people the credentials and the entry that they need into our local marketplace, into our local job marketplace. We provide neutral mediation, investigation, and fact-finding. And when you talk about what the commission does, we investigate allegations of discrimination within the city. That's been our long-time goal, but it's kind of buried in the middle of what we do. And there's a reason for that, because our number one goal is not to root out people that commit discrimination and make sure that they're punished. Our number one goal is to discourage discrimination in the first place. And if we can do that through education rather than through enforcement, that's what we want to do. But we are there to investigate, and as Councilman Shope knows from his years on the commission, we have been fortunate over the last several decades, in fact, to have some very experienced, very professional investigators on our staff. And so our reputation within the legal community in Lincoln that deals in discrimination cases has always been very high. And it's our hope to be able to maintain that reputation. We provide, so that providing that education and training is a vital part of what the mission is, as well as providing investigation for complaints of discrimination within our city workforce. Those don't happen very often, fortunately, but when they do happen, we have to have a professional that's able to do a timely investigation and report in a professional manner. We also host, as I'm sure a number of you are aware from attending, a regional civil rights conference. That's the only civil rights conference of its kind in the area. We've been hosting it very successfully for a number of years. Fortunately, this year we were unable to have it because of the pandemic, but I can tell you, under Mindy's leadership, last year the conference was our most successful ever. We had anticipated building on that this year, and I'm sure next year will be a tremendous success as well as we maintain and build on that reputation. Going back to the civil division, I wanted to talk a little bit about what we do within the context of the pandemic. We have been, like a number of city departments, not overwhelmed, but very, very much engaged in dealing with the pandemic over the last 3 months. There have been days when it has absorbed maybe half of our total attention, and not just of one attorney. And we've had Rick Tast, who's been our main attorney supporting the health department for, well, pretty much ever since he joined the department, the law department. He's been pretty much out there every day, all day long, and then on weekends, because they've needed that kind of support, and he's got the background and the aptitude. He's done an outstanding job, but it hasn't just been him. I mean, we've had days when we've had 5 or 6 attorneys at least in the law department working on different issues related to the COVID pandemic. And it's been things from reviewing and updating the emergency declaration process to all of the healthcare health crisis directives, negotiating housing for our essential employees that may have been exposed to the COVID virus, and also to our homeless people. One of the things that I think it's easy to forget about because it's been such an outstanding success is we've been able to protect our homeless population thus far from COVID because we were proactive. We found places for them to go that didn't protect them entirely, but put them in a better place. And not every community has had that. In fact, very few have, I think, reacted as successfully and as proactively as we have. In talking about implementing the expanding dining options, the dine out applications that you're going to see on your agenda as early as next Monday. And these are examples of what we do, not because we have been the lead agency, the only agency. It's because we've been a partnership, working with the health department, working with urban development, working with all the different agencies. And it's not unusual for us to have a meeting with 3 or 4 different departments represented. And we're there because we're almost always there when the city's trying to do something new or proactive, because we're part of the team. We are also, well, we're all involved, as you know, with everything that appears on your agenda. What you may not know, because it's more of a hidden contribution that we make, you'll see Tim C. or Add to the Trail in the audience when there's a redevelopment agreement before you, an annexation agreement, or some sort of a zoning issue before you. You very seldom hear from them because you don't have legal questions. They're there to provide support if there are legal questions for you, but what you don't see is the fact that they're there at the Planning Commission answering questions, that they're working with the developers, working through problems, and solving a lot of problems that don't come before you because they're solved along the way. So they're very skilled, very professional. They're working in partnership with our planning department, our urban development department. So those are the kinds of work that we do on all the programs and all the things that come before you that we do the background work on and hopefully solve those problems so you don't have somebody standing here screaming at you because things didn't work right. This slide gives you an idea of the scope of what we do as far as actively representing 61 departments and divisions. I asked Terry to include the numbers because I think it gives you some scale of the diversity of the issues that we see. I mean, we see over 3,000 agreements a year, and some of those are pretty pro forma, the kinds of agreements we've done over and over again that don't take much time to review. Some of those are very involved, complicated agreements that we have to spend a lot of time on getting them ready for your approval. We're currently handling 70 civil litigation cases. That doesn't give you a full idea of what the load is, and that's part of the reason why we have to be staffed the way we are, because every case that goes to litigation is not the same. Some of them are pretty easy. We had a lawsuit, for example, for a contract violation of porta potties, and they actually handled a fairly high-powered law firm to represent them on that case because they thought they were being mistreated. We argued that they were not. The case was actually dismissed in court after a couple of years, drug on for a while. We didn't spend a lot of time on that. Didn't have hugely complicated legal issues. The city didn't do anything wrong, and there weren't a lot of facts involved. But then you'll have a case like the case we had last year that went to a civil jury trial up in Omaha. We had 3 attorneys that were present, not only the preparation of that case, but actually a trial. It was a trial that took day after day after day, jury trial. And so you don't always know when a case comes in the door what kind of resources it's going to take. You don't have any control a lot of times over how long it takes, what sort of tactics the opposing counsel uses. So we have to be prepared for all of those cases. So this is our budget as far as 98% is general funded. The grants in aid, those are grants that go to the Commission on Human Rights. We always have grants that go to the Commission on Human Rights. There are cases that we take for employment and for housing discrimination. Those are funded on a case-by-case basis by federal agencies. We've also, under our current leadership, been successful in applying for several other grants that are for specific initiatives. So when you look at that part of the budget, that 2%, that's all the human rights budget. One of the bits of information we try to provide for you on an annual basis is a comparison between what our hourly rate is for attorney time, fully loaded, versus what it would cost the city if you were to go out into the market and to pay for a private attorney to do the same kind of work. And as you can see, that's a pretty significant difference. When you look at specialty work, and one example of specialty work is we did hire a patent firm a few years ago because we don't do patent laws. And that's something that we didn't have any specialty in, we're not likely to do a lot of, didn't make sense for us to get to speed on it. That's unusual because we seldom do that, but occasionally we will if we feel the need for that kind of specialization. The $250, if you go out and hire an attorney, you might say, well, I got an attorney in Lincoln for less than $250 an hour, and you can. There are plenty of attorneys that take less than that. But when you look at the level of experience that we have from all of the attorneys we have in our office right now, it's going to be difficult for you to hire somebody with that level of expertise and experience for the low end of the attorney rate in Lincoln, Nebraska. We always want to make the argument because when you look at other communities that are out hiring outside counsel, the question comes up, I think occasionally, well, why wouldn't we do that? Then we can control costs because we only hire somebody when we need somebody, particularly in litigation. I feel very strongly, our department feels very strongly, that the value of in-house legal counsel is incalculable. And I'll just give you one example of that. We talk about, this slide talks about the various reasons why it's good, but when I look at it from the litigation standpoint, one of the things that we do when we get a case that's filed against Lincoln or a claim that comes in, or we hear of an occurrence. An example would be we had a couple of city light poles a few years ago, 3 or 4, 5 years ago now. We had 2 light poles fell over within a few months period. One of the claims, I think we actually paid. The other claim we denied and wasn't appealed to the council, is my recollection. But what we did was we called a meeting. The law department called a meeting with the folks who were involved, and we sat down and talked about, okay, why is this happening? Do we have some sort of a problem with a particular type of light pole? Do we have a problem with the maintenance? What's our maintenance schedule? And the reason we did that is we wanted to be proactive. Having that built-in relationship and that vested interest in protecting taxpayer dollars, but also having a working relationship with our department. All of the departments have somebody in our law department, an attorney that works with them on a regular basis. So when they have a question, they don't say it's going to be a hassle to find out what the answer is. They say, I'm going to call up Chris because I talk to him pretty much every day or every week, and he's going to give me some guidance on this. And that saves them time because they're not worrying about it. They're not putting off a decision. And it gets us involved in case we have some important guidance, because quite often we do a recommendation to go one way rather than the other to escape some legal liability or to give the city some protection or put us in a better bargaining position or whatever. Those kinds of interactions are seamless, they're timely, and it's hard to measure the value to the city, but it is immense from having that kind of relationship between our city departments and our city attorneys. And I would suggest that you see that value, because when you have a question about something on the agenda, or you have a question about something you think should be on our agenda, you give us a call and we try to get back to you as quickly as we can, and we look at what other cities do, we propose specific language, we give you drafts, we work with you on coming out with something. Might not be quite as quick as you'd like to have, but we prioritize it, and I hope that you have a certain level of trust with the advice that we give you. With that, any questions? It's kind of a broad overview on how the department operates.
Councilwoman
Yes.
Raybold?
Jeff, back on the hourly rates on that chart that you presented, and I want to make sure I heard you correctly. The hourly rate that was presented for our in-house legal of $137 an hour. You said it was fully loaded, that included all the benefits?
It does, yes. And it would include, let me check with Terry to make sure I'm right, it would include the value of our rent, for example. Because if you hire an outside counsel, you're paying for their rent, you're paying for all their overhead, so it wouldn't be fair to just look at, I mean, but that's what they're charging their hourly rate for. And when we talk about why that is such a bargain, one of the things I would point your attention to is the experience that we have now in our legal staff. So I've been in the city law department for about 9.5 years now, which is actually about as long as I've had any employer. That makes me a newbie in the law department. When we look, when we look at the civil side, we average 16.2 years of experience in the law department. That's not legal experience, because we've had a lot of people, well, a number of them have come with outside experience. That's just legal experience in the law department. Our prosecutors have averaged 25 years and most of that time, as I think back of who they are, almost all of that time has been as prosecutors. Now, some of them have been civil attorneys for a while and come back and forth. Marcy Brownlee, for example, was a prosecutor. We had her on the civil side for a while, and she was excellent, and then she went back to the prosecution side. But when you think in terms of 16 years experience or 25 years of experience, so the average between the two is 19.5 years of experience. That's a tremendous value. They've been through a lot. They've learned over the years. And as a consequence of that, they're a lot more efficient than they would be if we hired somebody that, even if they came in with 2 or 3 or 10 years of experience, that experience would not be working with the city of Lincoln.
Any other questions for Mr. Kirkpatrick? All right, seeing none, thank you so much for coming out. We are at the break portion of our session, so we're going to take a quick 10-minute break, and we'll be back at 2:50 to hear from the finance and miscellaneous budgets part for about 30 minutes. All right, we'll go ahead and kick it off for 30 minutes of finance and miscellaneous budgets with Brandon Kaufman. And when we get to the 25-minute mark, I'll just kind of go like this to give you a heads up.
Okay, we're gonna try to split this up between Sherry and I too, so I don't drone on.
You don't want to drone on for?
Yeah, I sound a lot like Charlie Brown's teacher, so. Wah, wah.
I got the reference.
Okay, so finance, so, the main goals that we've been trying to help support throughout this pandemic process is to ensure public safety, health, quality of life. To do that, we've been spending a lot of time purchasing materials for PPE and other things. So purchasing has played a key role in assisting the team out there. And then we're also assisting with the claim part of the process so that we're working with the state to make sure that we can access eligible dollars to get reimbursed for those expenses that are eligible through this whole federal appropriation process. In addition, we just provide financial support is the backbone to everything that's going on. Payroll has spent quite a bit of time in this process. Not only are they setting up a new payroll system, but we have a lot of new leave codes and things that came into place with pandemic leave, and then the 2 types of federal leave that were also made available throughout this process. So they've taken a significant amount of time to help support that. So this is my iceberg picture. I say, finance is kind of like an iceberg. Above the surface is minimal compared to what we do on the back end, what we do beneath the murky sea level. So most of the things of what you see probably us doing is purchasing, working with vendors, or budget mostly on an annual basis. But a lot of what we do kind of behind the scenes, so accounting, we do go through the annual audit process to ensure accountability of public dollars. In addition, accounting is very important because guess what? You guys get paid every 2 weeks, and we make sure all of our employees get paid every 2 weeks. We make sure our vendors get paid adequately. So that's main goals of accounting. Budget, just assisting all the policymakers throughout this resource allocation process. You all see the clerk on a very regular basis for not only the documentation, but also to providing the support for you all to function as a group. Purchasing, just trying to utilize the most efficient and effective use of public dollars, also through equitable processes that are set out through either our charter, code, or federal guidelines. And then treasury, so cash management and revenue collection, because we also collect a lot of dollars for occupation taxes to help support the JPA, occupation taxes that the city has in place for telecommunications or various type of, and then also fees and fines that are in place that the city clerk also supports. So our general fund is about $3.6 million. That's split between those 6 divisions of accounting, budget, clerk, treasurer, administration, and purchasing. Of those divisions, purchasing supports 4 different agencies. So they support the city, the county, the JPA, and the PBC. So we're working on behalf of all those agencies to make purchases for them. So we try to, do a lot of contracts that all the agencies can work off of and have access to. Accounting primarily support the city, but they also support the JPA. Budget office, primarily city, same with the clerk. Treasurer supports the city and the JPA. And then administration support the city and the JPA as well. Expenditure types, you see that 3.6 million. This looks like Pac-Man because basically all the money that we have in finance goes to support personnel cost. Of those things that we do, we can't really stop doing what we do because we still have to make payroll, we still have to pay vendors, we have to manage the cash. those are things that we cannot stop doing. So regardless of how much money we put into staff, we still have to do those things to support the organization. And if you cut too many staff at some point, then we start having internal control issues where, like segregation of duty, where especially in treasury function, where we can't have people reconciling bank statements, also handling cash, because if anything, that gives opportunity for fraud. Outside of that, fairly limited to data processing charges, paying for our rent through PVC, bonding for public officials. So those are kind of a lot of what we spend outside of that. So cutting is fairly limited for what we can do outside of staff opportunities. In addition, the finance budget has about $12.5 million in revenues that we collect. So those taxes that are in place, the majority of those taxes come through two sources, telecommunication and the cable franchise fee. Cable's been fairly flat. Telecommunication has been dropping for years. Part of that's due to as people drop landlines, those occupation taxes decrease, but I think there's also changes that were made at the state level that dropped some of those occupation taxes as well. Fees and fines, that's primarily Black Hills Energy. There's also other application fees that come in through there that the clerk collects for various types of pawnbroker or applications that we receive. We do all this with a staff of 41 and a half. That's remained flat for this fiscal year compared to the prior year. You can see there was a bump of 5 in the previous budget, and that was primarily due to centralization of payroll. So we've been going through this implementation process for a new HR payroll system, because ours was put in place in the 90s. We're one of a handful of customers still on that platform. So we're working to get that replaced. Our goal is October to be fully finished with this system. We're actually live on the HR side, and we're stepping this in. So every 4 weeks now, we go live with a new part of the system until we hit October, and then we're completely live. So part of that change was to move 5 staff from the departments, centralize them into finance, and then we support payroll processes throughout the whole city. And that's just from an efficiency of the system. So, we're going from a very paper-driven process where, somebody fills out a paper, they hand that to a clerk. That clerk re-enters that into TESRAC. And then now we're going to have everything's handled online. We have HCM Oracle, so somebody could go into an app, request a leave absence. They could do that through a computer. So there's going to be various methods. You've probably seen the time clocks on the walls here in City Hall. Those are being deployed. This is a city-county project too. So those are being deployed throughout our work sites. And those are going to be utilized to put time into this system as well. So those time clock plus clocks are going to feed into our Oracle, so somebody can just submit their time card, and the time already automatically comes in. So significant changes in the finance budget. So we had a $37,000 reduction in the planned rent for PVC. So when we were centralizing those folks, we were actually out of room within finance. And so we were looking at other property that PVC owned. Instead of doing that, we just renovated all of finance. And so we fit more staff into the same square space that we have, which allowed us to reduce the rent to PVC. In addition, we had some miscellaneous contractual services for payroll that we weren't utilizing on an annual basis, so we took that down. And then we also have the vacancy savings of 1% that we have to meet. As we have retirements throughout finance, we'll look at holding some of those positions in order to meet the vacancy savings for the upcoming year. So back to the deliverables that were, we're accountability for public dollars, assist policymakers for resource allocation, keep the documentation for the city, purchasing, and cash management. So those are really our core functions. If you have any questions about the finance budget, I'm here to answer. And if not, then Sherry has miscellaneous budget.
Councilwoman Raybold?
Brandon, I was a little bit surprised by the bump up in the number of FTEs in the accounting department. I thought with the new software for the payroll processing that it would eliminate so much of that paperwork and the duplication and the data entry of part of it. Can you walk me through a better understanding of why there was an increase of 5?
So we, throughout this process, right now, there's PA clerks on all the departments. And in the bigger the departments, they're processing payroll. That's their primary function. But in the smaller departments, you might have somebody that's doing payroll, they're doing accounts payable, they're doing accounts receivable. So we went out and identified the larger departments and identified those positions to pull in. So now with this new system, nobody's going to be doing data entry, but there's still going to be a lot of audit and verification on the finance side in order to make sure that all of the paychecks are getting processed that should be. So we're not missing punches. If somebody came in and they forgot to punch the time clock, then it's going to show up as an error in the system. So there's a lot of verification throughout the process. So a lot of what they're going to be doing is, especially on pay weeks, is tracking down departments, making sure that the supervisors, because that focus now shifts to the supervisor or employee relationship for an approval process. So when we did this whole review, our benchmark, which we looked at standards nationwide, was about 300 people per one clerk. So we'll have about 300 per one person. So one person's going to be responsible for making sure all of those 300 people get paid on a regular basis. As we go through this, we go live with the system, and if we see efficiencies, we'll hold, and if we have turnover, we're going to hold on those positions on filling them, because we want to make sure that we have the adequate staff to start this, and then if we need, we'll back that down. But we found that 300 is kind of that benchmark standard, so that's where we're starting at, and then we'll back down from there.
Councilwoman Washington?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question was similar, because since I saw you bump up the 5 for HR accounting, or payroll accounting, I was curious when you said that you would take vacancy savings this year for any retirements, and I was wondering if that meant, would you take a vacancy saving if someone retired from payroll?
See, the tough part right now is like,
I'm not
Yeah.
trying to pinpoint employees, I don't know who they are or whatever, but I'm just sort of looking at.
I'm gonna have, so in the end, I'm gonna have to manage the budget to generate 30,000 in savings. So
Yeah.
whether that comes from a combination of holding off on contractual services if we can, or if I have a retirement, then I'm gonna do that to hold those. So, payroll, would that be ideal if I had an opening? Probably not, because I'm in the process right now of trying to establish a new central collection point for the city.
Yeah.
And so I'd ideally not take it from there, but if I have to, I'm gonna have to. So.
And I say that knowing, having gone through a system change like this before, and having to, that relationship between frontline employee and supervisor, running off your app, trying to give them leave as they're asking for it every hour is a challenge.
Yes. This system implementation is going to be very challenging, to say the least. And we're going from a very paper-driven process to now everything online. So I can't imagine the amount of calls that we're going to have coming in on passwords and various other things, but there's a lot also as we move through, we're doing dual entry on these systems as well. So right now, HR, when they hire somebody, since HR is live, they're entering into Tesseract and then they're entering into HCM. We're going to have to continue this until we go live fully in October. And then we we stop in Tesseract and everything is now in HCM. So the county goes live this week for absences. So any type of vacation, sick leave requests, anything that comes through, they're going live. I think they're expecting about 1,000 absence entries that they're going to have to dual entry for the upcoming pay period. So we're about double of what the county is. So we're going to have a lot of dual entry until we get through this whole process as well.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Brandon? It
Okay,
seems
with
like
that,
part
I'm
two.
going to turn it over to Sherry to do miscellaneous budgets.
Thank
Yeah.
The miscellaneous, all right. Good afternoon.
Oh, it works. Okay, good. So hopefully some of these miscellaneous budgets categories are going to answer some of the questions or show you some of the things that you couldn't find when the county agencies were speaking yesterday. We should have led with this, but the miscellaneous budgets begin on page 139 under the miscellaneous budgets tab if you care to follow along in your books at all. Miscellaneous budgets is essentially a collection of 9 pretty unrelated funds that don't fit nicely into any one department elsewhere in the budget. So they're kind of centrally administered by the finance department, many of them. Some support a number of departments citywide, and then a couple of them, like the Community Health Endowment and the Public Pinnacle Bank Arena, are developed largely outside of our budget process by their own governing boards. So we go on here. Okay, and so where the money comes from for these miscellaneous budgets, again, it's not a very related total, but it's over $81 million that's represented here, and the vast majority of that, $63 million, comes from the general fund. In addition to the general fund piece, several of these other funds, bond interest and redemption, turnback tax, special assessments, and tax allocation funds, are also funded largely by property taxes and sales tax are their funding sources. And then what the funds are expended on is largely personnel services. One of the big pieces of the pie here shows 37% going directly to personnel service. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but that is primarily in the general expense business unit for the fringe benefits for all the general fund departments citywide. In addition to those personnel services, though, the 32% identified as transfers is also largely made up of personnel cost. That represents interfund transfers from the general fund to our special revenue funds like StarTran, Health and Animal Control, Aging. Those special revenue funds generate a considerable amount of revenue from grants or user fees or other revenue sources of their own, but they still require tax support in their operations. All right. I don't know how many of these things are really highlights, but a couple things that I want to point out about the various funds here. One of the first ones is under advanced land acquisition, and in fact, these first two items are just highlighting some changes we're making in our budget documents to try and improve them. And so for the first time this year, we are showing transfers to capital improvement projects going out of the operating budgets. So advanced acquisition is on page 142 of the miscellaneous budgets, and I highlight it only because there were no appropriations shown there last year. And so this isn't a significant change. This just represents the transfers to a fire station project and a neighborhood park land purchase in the CIP. Another one of the improvements we've been working on since the last biennium and continuing into this biennium are to better report revenues in individual cost centers and business units. So there's nothing new about the unassigned revenue business unit. It's just the first time that we have included it in our budget book in this category. So this is a business unit where all the property tax and sales tax is accounted for. Other things that I would highlight about that in this current year's budget is this is where some of the tools that we use to help close the deficit show up. We've talked about changing our cost allocation model for central service charges, which is what enterprise and internal service funds, that's how they contribute to centralized general fund costs like human resources, finance, law department, city council, mayor's office. So that is shown here under intergovernmental revenue. The unassigned revenue category is on page 144, if you're following along. It's also where the additional revenue for the LES dividend and retaining the unrestricted interest earnings for general fund also show up in this category in miscellaneous budgets. Contingency fund, I essentially just want to say there's no changes there. The appropriations remain at $765,000 as they have been for several years. $400,000 of that is still funded by parking revenues. To date, we've never needed to tap into the parking revenue for contingency purposes, but it is still a funding source. General expense begins on page 146, the detail, and there's just a couple, several items, I guess, in this budget that I'd like to point out. As I mentioned earlier, this is where all of the fringe benefits are budgeted for general fund departments citywide. And so one thing you see here, because we're at a lower level of detail that you haven't seen in the department budgets, is a negative amount of about $267,000 for vacancy savings. So that represents the 1% savings to fringe benefits like FICA and pension for lower salary costs throughout the departments. So I just wanted to point out also that every department has a negative line item like this in their budget to target for them the amount of savings that they need to realize going forward. Just to share with you what our health and dental insurance assumptions were, we're assuming a 3% increase for health insurance rates and a 4% increase for dental insurance rates. Those are the assumptions that our personnel projections are based on. We are also showing in general expense for the first time line items for Social Security and unemployment compensation. Those items currently have their own separate funds and their own tax levies. Our total 31-cent tax levy is made up of a combination of levies from 6 funds. We are proposing in this budget to shift the unemployment compensation and the Social Security tax levies to just combine them here in general expense with the other general fund fringe benefits. Why we have those individual funds predates any of us that remain here today, and we think it would be nice to simplify our tax levy a bit. I do have to say we will stop levying additional tax for that. It'll take a number of years to phase out the funds as delinquent property taxes continue to come into those funds, but we'd like to get started. Information services, we've heard a lot about information services, the new cost allocation model from some of the department presentations. This is a budget that has several line items that show some of the savings from this reallocation. As you scroll down past the middle of the first page, you'll see a data processing service line item, a systems development line item that's gone from $905,000 to zero, and then a software line item. A little closer to the bottom of the page is citywide payroll system and Oracle financial system. So the systems development line item, for instance, is where some of this cost has been shifted out to the individual departments. You'll see below on the Oracle financial system line item, we've experienced some increase there. That's this budget's shift of systems development to the cost to support our J.D. Edwards financial system. So there's not a wash, but as other departments have taken increases, this is where you see some of the savings. We've also had some increases, as Brandon mentioned, as we continue to phase in our new payroll system. So it wasn't a dollar for dollar in and out, but this is where some of the savings was, or some of the expense was shifted from. I don't have much to say about city share of county agencies. You heard all that yesterday, but I might just point out that, again, near the bottom of the first page, you'll see some line items like shared services, human services. That was Sarah Hoyle's budget. This is where the city share comes out of. Civil defense is emergency management, as Brandon mentioned yesterday. I think the other departments that came in were weed yesterday. That is actually part of the LTU budget. Also on the JBC contributions come out of this budget. Where is that? It's called Human Services. Oh, yep, just down here underneath the county agencies. We are projecting a 3% increase in our contribution to the JBC agencies, and that did line up with the numbers that Sarah presented in her presentation. Just a couple other rather large line items in this budget that I just bring to your attention is the Downtown Lincoln Association line item. We call it City Share of Lincoln Center Maintenance near the top of the second page. It's for $464.5 thousand, and that is just our contract with DLA for downtown maintenance. That's kind of our supplement to the BID maintenance district. Minor building and grounds improvements is rent to the building commission for some centralized facilities or facilities outside of the department budgets. Election expense fluctuates greatly depending on the upcoming elections, and the $395,000 that's included here is to represent just the November general election, the council at large elections in the spring, and just a small amount of money for any unanticipated, potentially a bond issue or something that we might want to go forward with. The industrial promotion line item right below election expense, that represents primarily our contribution to the Lincoln Partnership for Economic Development of $700,000. And then we have just some other smaller events that we have been supporting in recent years, including the Veterans Parade and the Lincoln Calling Celebration. So with that, I know it's a really big and diverse budget, but unless you have any specific questions for me, that's what I know about miscellaneous budgets this year.
Councilwoman Ward?
Thank you. Sherry, where would the Lincoln Calling and Veterans Parade, which line item?
I know this, again, this is a really old chart of accounts. I don't take credit for this, but it's called industrial promotion. It's
So it's
right
with-
underneath election expense.
So is that where LPED is also? That's 700?
Yes.
So it's LPED, Veterans Parade, and Lincoln Calling,
Correct.
all equal $765,000. Do you know the breakdown on that? Yep, we
And so
know.
I'm thinking around 25,000 for Lincoln Calling.
Okay, or sometime, I'm just curious. Well, and
Right.
if that, yeah, okay, thank you. Close enough.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Sherry.
Thank you, Sherry. Coming up next, we have Jennifer. from the mayor's office to talk about city communications in the mayor's office. We'll talk for about 30 minutes, and when we get to the 25-minute mark, I'll give you a little signal.
I don't think we'll need 30 minutes. Good afternoon. Oops. There we go. Okay, I'm here to talk a little bit about the mayor's department budget, and we're a much smaller department than we were on Monday. So normally we would have the mayor's office with divisions of aging and city communications, and now with the establishment of the aging department, we have our mayor's office, executive team, and city communications. And we work on a daily basis to support the priorities of the mayor's budget, which you've seen many times through these presentations. But in terms of what we do in terms to elevate the strategies within this proposed budget with regard to public safety, health, and quality of life, I talked to all of you in our preview presentations related to the budget about the key performance indicators for city departments. And we are in the process of developing an external dashboard with metrics for the city of Lincoln that we're also working on. We have a summer fellow from Harvard University that's working with us and our IS team to put that together, and it's our hope to have that actually available by the end of this budget process. So that is underway. In terms of building an equitable, inclusive, and resilient city, you know, and we've talked several times about the Mayor's One Lincoln and Resilient Lincoln initiatives, and those are part of our daily work and the work of our mayor's advisory team. And it is also our hope that we will have completed the climate action plan within the next budget year. We did take a little bit of pause in terms of the development of that plan during the pandemic. We've been evaluating what the right public engagement process will be. I think we all expect that we want to have a lot of public engagement and discussion around what a final action plan will look like. And so now that we're kind of getting into the regular business of living in this pandemic, we want to make sure that we're moving those forward. In terms of the services we've provided during the pandemic, we've spent a lot of time on communication. The mayor's daily briefings have been a major focus for our team over the last 3 months. We've also worked with cultural communities across the city in terms of developing PSAs in order to get out those important public health messages and have them translated into other languages. We really feel like that is a major part of what we've been spending our time doing during the pandemic and working with the health department to get those important messages out to the community. In addition, the mayor and our team have spent a lot of time convening stakeholders, connecting with industry groups, and providing information in terms of successful and safe operations throughout the city. And finally, in terms of focusing on investment, infrastructure, and economic recovery, we have, and a position related to the Workforce Investment Opportunity Act has always been included in the mayor's office's budget, but we have moved the person who worked as the director of WIOA for, I think, almost 20 years, left earlier this spring, and we have a new program manager for that program, Dylan Wren, and Dylan is now located inside our office suite in the mayor's office, and we're looking forward to having him work directly with our team to focus on workforce. Alyssa Martin, as you know, our economic development advisor, is leading our Lincoln Forward initiative, which is really pivoting and working with the Economic Recovery Task Force to try and determine what the appropriate investment and assistance the city needs to provide in order to help our community recover from the pandemic. So that's been the focus of what we've been doing as we thought through the budget. This is just a recreation of the organizational chart, and John Carlson wanted me to say I'm on page 135 if you didn't know where we were in the book, and this organizational chart is there as well, and it really just shows you how we are organized. If there was a dotted line from myself to each of the department directors, that would be included so you kind of understand how our reporting structure works. But as you see there, John Carlson, our Deputy Chief of Staff, oversees the work of all of our initiatives. We do have the WIOA program reporting up through our economic development lead, and then you see City Communications, which is another division of the mayor's office. And with that, I'm going to step aside for a few moments and let the communications manager, Diane Gonzalez, talk to you about their work.
Hello, everybody. Hopefully I won't sneeze during this, but you'll definitely hear it if I do. I'm Diane Gonzalez with the Citizen Information Center. That's an old name, City Communications. And we are the only remaining division of the mayor's office at this point. One of the aspects of local government that's really been highlighted during the pandemic is the importance of clear and accurate and timely information for the public. And that is basically the focus of City Communications. That's what we focus on all year long. As I said, some of you may hear Citizen Information Center or CIC. That is an old name. Old habits die hard, so it's still out there on paperwork and that kind of things that go around, but we are at this time City Communications. So our team works with all the departments and the divisions in city government. Media relations is a big part of what we do. That involves news conferences and news releases and the kinds of briefings that we've been doing. We started weekly and now twice a week on the COVID pandemic. We do website and design and content, and I'll be talking a little bit more about the website a little bit later. Social media, of course, is a big aspect of what we do. And then we have a large government access television operation. We refer to it as LNK TV, but there are actually a couple different channels, and I'll be going over that a little bit more lately because it's a little bit, when you hear public access, government access, education access, I'll explain what that means a little bit later. And we also do marketing, advertising, printed materials, and whatever else the departments bring forward for us. City Communications has 6 full-time employees, and we have 1.8 FTE that manages our health channel, and we are not planning any staffing changes at this time. Our current team is made up of people who have a lot of different skills. They're very flexible, and they can all do a lot of different things, and that has been of great benefit as we've been managing through the pandemic. I can't tell you how proud I am of the great work that our team has done over the last few months. City Communications has worked very closely with the health department to make sure that the public has the information that they need to stay safe and to keep everyone else safe around them. I want to talk a little bit about our team at LNK TV. Jamie Wenz, who is here today to answer any questions you might have. Bo Wolf and Melissa Fuller. They have basically said yes to everything that we brought to them in the last few months, from doing the daily briefings to quick PSAs to helping all the departments and divisions set up with Zoom meetings of what might be required for that. Since March 1st, LNK TV has done 138 live productions and 205 pre-recorded productions.
Holy crap.
There we go. Because we have no way we don't get ratings. We don't have any way to judge how many people actually watch us on TV sets. But we do have social media. And as you can see, since March 1st, viewership of the COVID-19 briefings on YouTube and Facebook have totaled about 147,000 viewers. Overall, on the health channel, we've always had really good viewership on YouTube on our health channel. Since March 1st, we've had almost 910,000 people access video content on our health channel's YouTube site. And let's not forget about the partnership between LNK TV and News Channel Nebraska to offer live coverage of Boys State basketball. That seems like a really long time ago. News Channel Nebraska, again, they're unable to track their viewership, but we do have the social media numbers on that. And for the 6 games that LNK TV produced on March 12th alone, viewership online was 162,000. News Channel Nebraska told us that that is triple the viewership that they had on 24 games the year before. Want to talk a little bit about John Taylor. He has provided crucial support for pandemic communications and also keeping all the other balls in the air and making sure people are informed about all the other things that are happening in city government. I wanted to let you know that the number of news releases we have done, since you get all those releases, sorry for clogging up your inbox, but we have tripled the number of releases that we do. Normally we send out about 30 a month, and in April we sent out 96, And in May, we send out 87. So we've been extremely busy. And last but not least, I want to mention Justin Comacher, who is our web guy. He has put in countless hours working with the health department to put together that COVID-19 website, and also just the day-to-day updates and keeping everything moving on that site has been a real job. The main pages of the city website, just to give you an idea, we generally get about 2.5 million unique pages per view. That's on our main pages on the city website. Since May 1st, well, since March 16th, looks like that's when the COVID-19 website went up. So for the past March, April, May, June, 3 months, we've had 484,000 unique visitors to our COVID-19 website. We also have grown in our Twitter followership as well. We have about 21,000 followers right now on the official city Twitter account. And here's the background on the channels. Some of you may hear reference to PEG channels, and what does that mean? And I wanted to clarify a little bit what that means. Basically, as a result of the cable franchise agreements, the city right now has 5 PEG channels. That stands for Public, Education, and Government. First is the 2 public access channels, and those are managed by Spectrum. We have 1 educational access channel, LNK TV Education, and our staff here manages that channel and produces sports programming. And again, if you've got any questions about that, Janie can answer that for you. And then we have 2 government access channels. Those are LNK TV City. That's the channel where we're on right now. The other is LNK TV Health, and it is the only government access channel devoted to health and wellness programming in the nation. Melissa Fuller has managed this channel since 2011, and her expertise, her connections in the community have just been invaluable during the pandemic. I want to talk a little bit about viewership. As I mentioned, it's hard to track our viewership on regular television. At the same time, we know that viewership on regular television is going down. So we have really worked to push our programming out on the channels that the public is watching right now. So all of our programs are available on YouTube. We use Facebook Live. We have video streaming and video on demand on our website. We did last year get something that we could call a rating. There was a performance evaluation of our cable providers that was done, and as part of that, there was a random sample survey, so a statistically valid survey. And I just want to read to you a bit of what the consultant concluded. Lincoln's LNK TV City channel garners a significant viewership. Major networks see viewership of less than 30% on a weekly basis. Having a 19% weekly viewership, which is what our city channel has, is considered very healthy. Lincoln residents are definitely interested in and using LNK TV City. For our health and our education channels, the report says their numbers also compare favorably to the many popular commercial channels and programs. So our crew at LNK TV continues to do a great job. I think we have one of the best government access television programs in the country. All right, budget. We basically have 3 funds. One is the general fund, and that's the main fund. Our cable fund is where we receive a portion of the franchise fees to operate our government access channels. The vast majority of those funds are used for equipment. We can only use a certain percentage for operations. We also have a separate fund for the health channel. It's now funded mainly through grants and user fees. Some city funds are involved in that, but as I said, mainly grants and user fees. And finally, well, everything else has been going on. We have a couple of major projects underway. One is the city website redesign. We're working with a consultant, Open Cities, to create a more streamlined version of our website, and the goal is to have that live in September. With the revised site, we're going to be using a content management system, which allows more people to post content, and we'll have a rights and permission system to review the content that goes on there. The new site navigation will be user-driven. Kevin Cass in the mayor's office is working on that project, and he's here today to answer any questions you might have about the website. And finally, we are getting a closed captioning system for LNK TV that will be paid for through the cable funds. We've worked closely with the Nebraska Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing to make sure that our programs, our COVID-19 briefings have all been interpreted for the hearing impaired. This will allow all of our programs on all our channels to have closed captioning. Right now, there's a closed captioning option offered on YouTube, but there's about, half-hour delay in getting that information onto the YouTube channel. So we think closed captioning will be a big improvement. So at that point, I will see if you have any questions for me, for Jamie Wenz, or for Kevin Cass.
Does anyone have any questions for Councilwoman Washington?
Thank you so much, Diane. Will the closed captioning system be in this year's, or is it this fiscal year or is it next fiscal year?
It will start, we're hoping to have it operational January?
No, it's being installed in the third week of July.
Third week of July.
So hopefully we're trained and at everything, and all of the billing should be in at the end of this fiscal year.
And the cost for that is about $100,000
Yeah, just shy
generally.
of $100,000 for equipment installation.
And this system, since you mentioned it, Jamie, come up here and explain why you chose this particular system.
The system that we've chosen is being used by a lot of other facilities similar to ours, and the real benefit to this one is it employs voice recognition software that is trainable as well. But the advantage to this is we are able to use the voice recognition software rather than paying a service to. Normally what we would have to do for a live meeting like this one is we would have to pay a service, which is around $100 an hour. And, so if you multiply that by every live meeting, every live news conference and things like that we do, it'd be a significant cost over the year. We estimated somewhere in the range of $10,000 a year just to pay for the captioning service, and that's in addition to all of our other service. So this one with the voice recognition, that it is also trainable, and also as we continue to pay our service contract on the system, any updates to, as language kind of changes and evolves, it starts learning new words that come up, or new things like COVID-19. I'd be curious to see how it would try to interpret something like that. But once you get the interpretation into the system, it starts to recognize it. So it'll do two things for us. It'll do any of our live meetings, plus any archive shows that we tend to rerun on a regular basis. A lot of the history and PAL programming. We'll be able to put that through the system, and it'll add captioning to that as well. So at first we're going to be tackling all of our live programming, and then starting a workflow and a plan to get all of the pre-produced programming that we do also captioned as well. So we're going to do that for all three of our channels, the public health and, the city, the health, and the education channels.
Councilwoman Raybould?
I don't have a question, but I do want to thank Jamie, Bo, your entire team, Diane, and staff for really going above and beyond and facilitating all the Zoom meetings that we've had, just to make sure the public is kept informed and that we abide by the Open Meetings Act. So, really, just all the work that you've done, and the education for a lot of us who were not so familiar with Zoom, but we're getting better. So thanks to your guidance. But just really want to say a great appreciation for all the extra work you've done and all the help that you've given the City Council.
Thank you, Jane.
Any other questions? Councilwoman Ward?
Thank you. Diane, is there a breakdown of your budget? You told us the sources, but is it just within the mayor's budget?
It is sort of within the mayor's budget. If you have questions about a specific line item at all.
No, I'm just looking for any.
Okay.
138, page 138 in the mayor's budget. Under general fund, you're looking for the numbers?
Yeah.
But I do have
Okay, well, we can talk
a sheet that's
later.
got more specific
Okay.
what we're spending on each line item.
Okay. Yeah, maybe that would be helpful, thanks. Oh, I guess that, just historically, so when you and I, when I knew you in the CIC, and the chief of staff was there, so that's before you were under, was CIC under the mayor's office at that time? And the budget was as well? It was just that you were physically located on K Street.
Right,
Right,
right.
so-
CIC has had many homes over the years. The division was actually created by Mayor Helen Busalis. So CIC's been around for a long time. We were at Old City Hall. When I joined in '98, we were at the K Street complex. And then we moved, when Mayor Westlake was elected, we moved here to the mayor's office, which at that time was on second floor. And now we're on third floor. So we've moved a lot, but
You're here to stay.
we're here.
All
yeah.
right, thank you very much.
And I believe CIC and City Communications have always been a division of the mayor's office.
And you foresee it staying that way, or maybe general, yeah, okay, very good. And thank you. I would just reiterate what Councilman Raybold said, and kudos as well to Jamie. And council has joined you on weekends for, so, yeah, Jamie and all of you, but thank you for rising to the occasion of our community's needs, so, thank you.
If any of you think of any questions afterward, just send me an email or give me a call, and I'll track down the information for you, so.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to go a little out of order here. We're actually going to have Brandon Kaufman come up and do an overview of the city council budget.
I think Jennifer's got one more slide.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Finish, sorry.
Yep, sorry, I apologize.
No, it will be very quick.
Out of order.
I'm sorry. No, it's great. This was just a little bit more information about how we are reducing the costs in our office in order to meet the budget. So we are also mandated a 1% vacancy credit, which is approximately $12,000, and we'll just have to tightly manage our office expenses. I don't foresee that being a problem in terms of trying to keep down travel expenses or the other kinds of issues within the pandemic. But we are also delaying the hiring of an office specialist. We had a retirement in the office this spring, and so when you look at the number of FTEs in our office, it says 16 and a half, and I would note it says actually 9.5 in the mayor's office, and that just recognizes that we are committing to delaying hiring that second office specialist for at least 6 months. So that's how I understand they put it in the budget book, but we will have a actual full human person in that space when we hire them. And then in terms of communications, you'll just see a shift from, to the cable access fund for some of their rent and software expenses, and that adjustment is also inside the budget book. But if there are any other questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions for Jennifer Brinkman? All right, seeing
Okay.
none, thank you so
Thank you.
much. All right, thank you so much. And Brandon will come on up and he'll give an overview of the city council budget and for about 15 minutes. It won't take that long. Feel free to sing to us.
I take 15 on your budget. Well, by
It's
far,
complicated. Our budget is very complicated.
you have one of the smallest budgets of the city, and it's basically all personnel cost. Including with that, there was vacancy savings of about $2,500 that was applied to the council budget. In addition, the individuals who worked on the council budget from the board proposed holding off on the delay of the research analyst position. So there's half a year a delay in the hiring of that position included within the budget to generate some savings within the budget. Outside of that, any significant, there was, increase in data processing charges, as we talked about, from the shifts to the departments from kind of that miscellaneous budget. So we saw some increase in that. And then there was also some increase for education and training purposes to put some dollars into the budget for council members to receive training for whether it's going to National League of Cities or any other local training opportunities. So outside of that, that's the budget. The total budget for council is $309,000. That's a decrease from the prior year, which was $315,000. So.
Any questions for Brandon?
Okay.
Thank you, Brandon. Just curiosity, what's the percentage decrease from last year?
Oh, I should have had that. I mean, it's, I'm not great at doing figures in my head, so here.
I think it's, I'm not a budget, but 6.7.
That sounds,
I did not come up with that number ourselves. Angie emailed that out.
Yeah. Let's find that computer. Right. Calculator.
well, $6,000 decrease. Just about 1.9%
Yeah, just
decrease.
short of 2.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? Did I buy enough time?
Yeah,
Didn't
my
look like I
gosh,
did.
you
Lynn's not
spent
quite
4
here.
minutes. Do you want to spend any more time?
I don't have anything else. I mean, if you have any questions of me, I don't think you want me to do that. Guarantee that. Okay, well, I know Lynn's on his way, so he should be here very soon.
And he's right here.
There we go. All right.
Thanks, Brandon.
He's just. He must be the most efficient budget. He is just.
He is. And we are. And we are.
Zip, zip, zip.
It's exactly what it is.
It's because, Lynn, we are saving council questions, for the answers to our questions for later.
Oh, good, okay.
All right, we got Lynn Johnson with Parks and Rec, who's going to talk for about 30 minutes about the upcoming budget, and about the 25-minute mark, I'll give you a sign.
That sounds great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And just so that you understand, you're wrapping it up, okay? So feel free to do a song and dance.
Well, good afternoon again. My name is Lynn Johnson. I am the Director of the Parks and Recreation Department, and I was reflecting last night. This is my 20th budget, so that must, I don't know what that means. They don't seem to get any easier. There we go. This is the Parks and Recreation Department's logo, and we really think the word fun in there is important. We're obviously one of the quality of life departments. We hopefully bring a lot of fun and vitality and energy to the community. And so our mission statement really is being fundamental to youth development, active living for all, livable neighborhoods and families, environmental stewardship, special places and events, and economic development. And here we go. Oops. There we go. I think we, like all of the other departments, have really spent the last 3 months thinking through how we develop how we deliver services and facilities to the community. And I would tell you that we have modified essentially everything that we have done during the last 3 months. And just kind of a quick overview. We know that parks and trails have been incredibly important to the community during this time. That as people are home and they wanted to get out, kind of parks were that place where they could go for a little physical activity and some mental well-being as well. And we know that use of parks and trails increased by more than 150% during the pandemic. We opened pools on Monday. We opened 5 out of the 9 pools on Monday. It went very well. We're anticipating that we'll have about 34,000 people who will swim in pools this summer. Compared to the normal 201,000, that number is lower, but we're very pleased to be offering that service this year. Ball fields are open, actually starting tomorrow. Games will be able to start at ball fields. Practices started back on June 1st. In spite of all of this, EAB is the slow-moving crisis that is coming into Lincoln. We know that emerald ash borer has been identified in Lincoln. We have continued to remove and then make arrangements for replanting trees on the pace that we anticipated. We're anticipating removing 1,000 ash trees this year and then making arrangements for planting 1,000 replacement trees. The piece of this that people may not think about is that community forestry really is part of public safety in the community. That our community forestry section manages about 82,000 street trees. And a week ago, almost 10 days ago, when we had those 3 back-to-back storm events, we've had about 600 calls for services. To give you some perspective, last year we had about 4,900 calls for services total, which is still a significant number. And so we're obviously in the process of continuing to clean up, but the very first part of that process is getting streets opened up to public use, getting sidewalks opened up to public use, sadly removing trees from cars and removing trees occasionally from houses. And so really the work that the community forestry section does beyond the day-to-day management of the public forest, some of it really is that emergency response of getting the community opened back up after a storm event. We have summer day camps in process today, as a matter of fact, at 8 locations, and they're modified this year. We have group sizes of 15, and we are serving about 221 children a day. That's about half of the number that we would normally be serving, but we're pleased to be providing that service to families because we think it's likely that that's allowing families to be able to work. The F Street Community Center, all of our recreation centers did continue to be open during the pandemic, but I wanted to highlight the F Street Community Center because of where it's located in south of downtown. It provides some very important social services as well as recreation services as well. We continue to provide daily meals there for older adults and youth during the pandemic. We also distributed food and meals to people who needed it from that facility. And because of where it's located, that facility in particular serves vulnerable populations in the community. It did continue to be open and provide service during that period of time. We know that the investment that we make in infrastructure, Parks and Recreation infrastructure, helps support the local economy. We have contracts for design and engineering services. We have contracts for construction that is currently in process. You can see a list there of some of the major projects that are either in process or were just recently finished. The nature education was finished about 2 weeks ago. And we've got about $6.3 million worth of projects that are either in design or construction right now that are helping support the local economy. So if we look forward and from where we have been working this past year in a modified way to where we are planning to be working, if you look at page 154, and I'll explain this a little bit because you're going to see a little bit different number here that is in the budget book, but I'll explain how we get to this number. You can see that the increase from last year's operating budget is about $3,000. So I did the math last night. That's 0.02% increase. So essentially the budget is essentially flat. But the strategy for Parks and Recreation is that we want to maintain the same level of services that we are providing this year, and I'll explain how we got to that point with the same level of budget. The other thing that you're going to see is that FTEs are down just slightly, almost an FTE and a half, and we're reducing a couple of positions for that to happen. We're also adding maintenance of some parks and trails that I'll talk about here in a little bit. But so we have a slight decrease in the number of FTEs, and about 19% of our operating budget is generated through fees from our fee-based facilities or our fee-based programs. And that's fairly consistent, that we've been at about that 19% figure for a number of years. If you look on page 154, and I will get to that same page, you will see the total general fund contribution to the budget. And if you look down at transfers, which is in that far right-hand column, it's the second group of numbers down. That's $774,200 that's identified in transfers. A majority of that is general fund contribution to the Parks and Recreation Capital Improvement Program. And so if you take the $17,669.85 and remove the $774,200 of transfers, that's how I get to the $16,894,885, and I think that lets us do an apples-to-apples comparison of the operating budget last year and the operating budget that's proposed for next year. This is how the budget really is organized, and these are our major divisions within how the department is structured. And I think you can see the thing that I really wanted to highlight with this is that that essentially Parks is about 33.6% of the overall budget, and Recreation is about 32.4%. So those two divisions are equally about a third each of the budget. And the remaining portions of the budget are administration. The community forestry section makes up almost 13%. And then we are combining our planning and construction with our facilities maintenance section into a single division as part of this budget process, and that's just about 15%, of the operating budget. This is how the budget is expended. And because we're an operations department, about 2/3 of our budget is personnel. And compared to some other city budgets or some other city departments, their personnel number, their percentage of budget spent on personnel will be much higher than that. You can see that 28% of our budget is other supplies and charges. So that includes things like utilities, obviously water, electricity are significant expenses for us. Equipment rental is also significant because we pay equipment rental on essentially all of the equipment. So the mowers, the chainsaws, the trucks are all part of that equipment budget. So that's kind of an overview of as the funding is appropriated, how are we spending it? And then I was going to talk a little bit about, like I said, really the focus for this budget is how do we achieve an operating budget within the financial constraints that the city has right now without a loss of services. And essentially the way we did that is that you've probably already heard, and I know the mayor spoke about this on Monday, that each of the departments have been challenged to manage for a 1% vacancy credit. And we are developing a strategy of how we will achieve the savings of that $115,000. The next item on there, we had a bequest that was made to the city. The original will, I think, was back in the 1920s, if I remember right, but it worked through all the family members, and this year the gift to the city came to fruition, and it was just shy of $900,000. And what we are proposing to do with that money, that the provisions of that bequest or that trust were that the funds could be used for improvements or beautification of parks. And obviously very, very broad, very generous gift. We're proposing that we, by city council action, transfer that $900,000 to the Lincoln Parks Foundation, and then we use the annual proceeds of that to pay for the plantings and sunken gardens. So we're essentially using those proceeds to provide about half of the cost of the annual plantings and sunken gardens. So obviously an iconic facility, and that will help provide an ongoing funding source for that very, very beautiful place in Lincoln. We have a vacant assistant recreation center position. That position would be assigned to the Air Park Recreation Center. That's a savings of about $67,000. We typically have 4 interns. We're reducing that number to 2. Typically have 2 interns in our planning and construction section and 2 interns in our marketing section, and we would have 1 in each of those sections under this budget. We have a half-time office assistant position in our planning and construction section. We think that we can share some office assistant resources between sections and essentially cover that work, and so we're proposing to eliminate that position. We would be eliminating some marketing expenditures. You may have heard that Nicole Flectus, who is one of our special projects administrators, is going to be leaving at the end of the year. I'm very sad about that. But that frees up that position. And what we're proposing to do with that is that Nicole would like to continue to work with us on a contractual basis. And so we're proposing $20,000 in next year's budget that the Lincoln Parks Foundation would match those funds, and then Nicole would be a contractual employee of the Lincoln Parks Foundation and continue to do some of the important work that she's been doing for the department and for the foundation. We haven't done this before, but we think we can do this, is that to make up some of the additional cost of the plantings and then maintenance of sunken gardens, we would work with the Lincoln Parks Foundation to implement a sponsorship program to generate $50,000. So that's a new item there that we've not tried before, but we do think it'll be successful. We are cooperating with the Urban Development Department on working on the West O Street project, and landscape architects, one of the landscape architects that works in our planning and construction section will be doing some of the work on that project, on implementing that project. And then urban development, instead of hiring a private sector firm to do that, they'll essentially be contracting with us for that work. And so there will be TIF funding coming to the Parks and Recreation Department that will help support that position. And then in prior years' budgets, I think the last 4 years, we've had $200,000 a year in the operating budget that's been available to match private funds to build endowments for projects as we're building them. And so we'd be proposing, at least on a short-term basis, to eliminate that $200,000 out of the operating budget. And then the other piece of this is that we are proposing to temporarily defer some capital repair and replacement projects to maintain services. We think that it's okay to do some deferral right now because of the unique times that we're in, but to maintain levels of services that we recognize are important to the community. And so what we would be doing is that we have 89 playgrounds. They should be replaced on about a 25-year cycle. Generally, we are trying to replace 3 to 4 playgrounds a year. We had proposed initially in the capital improvement program to replace 3 playgrounds next year. We would be replacing 1 instead of 3. And I would tell you that we're feeling okay about this because we feel like we've caught up on the worst of the worst. And so I think we can stretch the life of those playgrounds for a few more years. The Two for Trees community donation program, you probably know a little bit about. That is a partnership that we have with Lincoln Water System. People can voluntarily add $2 to their Lincoln Water System utility bill. We collect those funds. It generates about $50,000 a year. And so we would be allocating those funds to help plant trees to replace ash trees. So we're reducing the funding that it would be available to replace ash trees, and we're replacing with Two for Trees funds. And then that next one down, we budget for funding to issue vouchers for replacement of existing street trees. And we have some residual balance that has built up in the Two for Trees funds, and so we'd be proposing to use that funding for that purpose instead of using general fund money to do that. And then this would defer about $100,000, would defer $100,000 worth of parking lot and roadway rehabilitation projects. And I can explain why we feel that we can do this. We have been accumulating funds for about 3 years with the idea that we need to do a major rehabilitation project that would include the roadway loop out at Mahoney Park. It would include work on North Shore Drive at Holmes Lake, and that would also include some significant roadway work out at Pioneers Park. We've accumulated a total of $780,000 towards that work. We bid that work about a month ago. We have a bid for $1,005,000 to do that work. And so we'd like to bring forward to the City Council a multi-year funding resolution that would commit the existing $780,000 of Keno money that we have appropriated, and then we'd be asking the City Council to commit to funding $230,000 out of Keno funds to accomplish that contract. And I know when we've discussed this with the mayor's office, the concern is what's happening with Keno funds. We have enough cash to cover that, so we don't need additional cash to do that project. And from what I hear, fortunately, Keno funds are also rebounding as restaurants are opening back up, so we're pretty confident. So that's one of the things that perhaps within the next couple of weeks that we'll be bringing forward to the City Council is that multi-year funding resolution to advance that project, and that lets us do $1 million worth of work on those roadways, and we feel like that catches us up a little bit, so it's okay to defer this for a little bit. The budget also includes about $111,000 of routine fee increases, and every 2 years we review all of our fees and we make incremental increases in those fees, and this is tiny, and I know it. And my understanding is you will be getting a copy of this PowerPoint presentation so that you can see what the fee increases are and what the current price is and what it would be going to. The process that we use for this is we start out with a conversation with the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, and Councilman Christensen has been in that conversation about looking at the programs we offer and identifying cost recovery goals for those programs. So making sure that we've got community guidance for what percentage of the cost of, for example, swimming pools should we be covering with revenues. And then the next step is that we look at what are similar facilities or similar programs, what's the cost of those in the community. We also look broader, typically we look at the state. So we try to make sure that we're keeping pace a little bit with inflation, we're also staying within our market as well, and we're achieving our cost recovery goals. We'd actually started this process prior to the pandemic, and so these cost increases had been we'd started working on those before this came around, but we still think that these are reasonable increases. Typically, they're a few dollars on the various types of services that we offer. This is what we will do for the community with that almost $17 million. We will continue to mow park areas on a 14-day cycle. And we have been having conversations with the mayor about, can we get back to a shorter mowing cycle? This time of year, you've probably all seen it, that it looks like we're mowing hayfields out there sometimes this time of year, and that 14-day cycle is pretty long. And we've been having conversations with the mayor about maybe during an upcoming budget cycle, we could look at getting back to a 10-year mowing cycle, or maybe even 7-day mowing cycle. But with this budget, we are funded at a 14-day mowing cycle. And I included that chart in there because you can see, or perhaps you can see, that mowing is about 16% of the work that our parks operations staff do. Actually, the area that is the highest percentage of their work is that janitorial cleaning category at about 20% of their work. And what that is supporting that 2,500 events and activities that happen in parks every year. So those are the family reunions and the picnics where people have reserved sites, those kinds of things. And we spend a lot of time supporting those events by cleaning shelters, making sure that restrooms are serviced, picking up trash and that kind of thing. We're not doing this year, and so we've actually cut back our labor force this year, but in a normal year, like I say, about 20% of our work is involved in supporting those 2,500 events a year. We now have 137.5 miles of trails in Lincoln. We know that those generate more than 1.5 million uses a year. They're probably one of the most heavily utilized facilities that we manage. Our standard is that we remove snow from the multi-use trails after 1 inch or greater of snowfall, and we will continue to maintain that standard. I talked a little bit about the almost 82,000 street trees that are managed. We are working, and we think that we can accomplish a 14-year pruning cycle. And I will tell you that that had been as high as 32 years. And so we really feel like it's important to put the resources into making sure that those trees are looked at on a 14-year cycle. And essentially what that does is that should reduce the amount of storm damage that we're seeing in the trees if we're able to attend those trees more frequently. We're changing a little bit our strategy on the Emerald Ash Borer Response and Recovery Program. We have been removing 1,000 trees a year. We're proposing to reduce that number to 800 a year. And the intent would be that we would take a portion of that time and we would start treating a portion of the trees. We feel like that it makes sense to treat the medium-sized trees that are in very good condition at this point so we can preserve their life. And then we can make a determination as we get towards the end of those 14,000 trees, how many of those ash trees we want to preserve on an ongoing basis. And so we felt like that particularly where we're at in that kind of death curve cycle, that beginning to treat some trees, we would do this in-house, and so we'd be shifting resources away from ash tree removal to chemical tree treatment for about 2 months out of the year. We've continued to manage and maintain the 13 public gardens, malls, and plazas that we have available to the community. Obviously, places like Sunken Gardens and Centennial Mall are part of the character and identity of Lincoln. The level of service in Wilderness Park and other greenways will continue at the level of service they are this year. With the last biennial budget, we increased the mowing frequency along the 31 miles of trails in Wilderness Park, and we'll continue to do that. And we are working on developing a master plan for enhancing user experiences in the park. And really, a lot of that is really improving how people get oriented to the park and then how they move through the park. So some of it's things like kiosks at the parking lots and improving the trail signage within the park. And so we'll finish that up by the end of the year, and then we actually have some funds in the capital improvement program to begin implementing the plan. This is one of the mayor's high priorities. School-age programs will continue to offer and participate in the Community Learning Center program. We'll continue to offer school or before and after school programs during the school year. We'll continue to offer summer day camps. We'll serve about 420 children a day with those services. We plan to go back to operating all 9 pools, hopefully next summer, and typically we have about 201,000 attendances. A program that kind of flies under the radar, to be perfectly honest, is Lincoln has a very long history of providing adaptive and therapeutic recreation programs to vulnerable populations in our community. And we serve every year about 575 unique youth and adults with a variety of both social and recreation programs. And then the Pioneers Park Recreation Center will continue to be, or the Pioneers Park Nature Center, not Recreation Center, will continue to be funded at the same level. We don't know how many people visit there who don't check in, but we know that about 86,000 people interact directly with the staff out there on an annual basis. We know that we'll continue to offer 33 sports fields to the community. We know that about 270 local youth baseball teams will use those facilities. We'll have about 600, almost 640 adult teams participate in team sport programs and about 1,500 youth participating in team sports programs. And our target is that we'll have 165,000 rounds of golf played on Lincoln's 5 public golf courses. I mentioned a little bit about adding some additional new facilities with community growth. We've identified locations for 3 new neighborhood parks that we are working on acquiring and developing in the next year or 2 years. One of those is in the North Hills neighborhood, which is between 27th Street and 14th Street, just south of Folkways. Prairie Village is just north of Layton and just east of 84th Street, kind of behind the Walmart in that area. And then the Woodlands at Yankee Hill is in far southeast Lincoln, and it's between 70th and 84th Street, south of Yankee Hill Road. And these will be small neighborhood parks that we will be bringing online in order to serve those newer and established, in one case, neighborhoods in Lincoln. And then the Stonebridge Trail will be completed, and that is a connection in far north Lincoln, Alva Road, into the Stonebridge development. It's about 3.71 miles of new, it's about 1.6 miles of new trail that will be coming online in that section of the community. Shifting to the capital improvement program, you may know, certainly Councilman Christensen knows about this because we've been through the process. Every 2 years, we work with the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, and we update a document that we call the 10-year facilities plan. And a large portion of that document is looking at the existing infrastructure, Parks and Recreation infrastructure that we manage, and look at what we think is going to need to be updated or replaced within the next 10-year period. We annualize that, and we identify that we need about $3 million on average a year to keep our existing facilities in good condition. You can see the funding sources that are dedicated to the Parks and Recreation Capital Improvement Program there. We get about $1.565 million of Keno funds, which is the largest portion of our capital improvement program. Another $280,000 is generated from cell towers that are on Parks and Recreation property. And then there's a gap of about $1.16 million. And typically, general fund fills some portion of that. And on a longer term basis, we need to figure out a strategy to really address that gap on a more permanent basis. We've talked in the past, the idea, one of the tools that Omaha uses, for example, is that they have quality of life bond issues on a 10-year cycle. And they work through a process of identifying improvements that the community would like to see made in the parks, including repair and replacement projects. They take that package of improvements to the community. They do like LPS. And once they establish that, they've been able to preserve that tax levy, and they just reapply it with the community's approval every 10 years. It's a potential tool that we might think about in Lincoln. On the right-hand side of the screen is the breakdown of the budget the breakdown of the capital improvement program budget as it is included in the budget. There's $2.36 million appropriated, so you can see we've got a gap of just about $600,000 from the $3 million that we identify in the 10-year plan. $1,565,000 of Keno funds, the cell tower revenue. There's general fund contribution in the CIP of $465,000. And then if you look at the asterisk point down below, there's $275,200 also in the CIP for the Emerald Ash Borer Response and Recovery Program. And then you can see the $50,000 of 2 for Trees money identified there as well. So we know we've got a gap. That's not uncommon. It just means that we've got to develop a strategy for addressing that in the future. Big projects, one that I'm particularly excited about, a long time coming, is that we are developing a strategy for funding the Air Park Recreation Center replacement project. And it would be co-located with the Arnold Elementary School building. We're very excited about that project. We worked with Clark Anderson and developed a plan for that so we know the cost. The proposal that we'd like to bring forward, working with the Finance Department and the City Council, is a 15-year bond to build that project, and then we would pledge Keno funds over a 15-year period to retire that bond debt. And so that $480,000 that we projected would be needed to cover the bond debt is included in the CIP. So if the council is comfortable with moving forward with that project, we are prepared to move into the design phase of the project and bid that in the spring. And we think it's about 18 months worth of construction. So we think that new building, if we wanted to move on that time frame, could be ready to open in the spring of 23. Make sure I'm doing the math right. 21. Yep, that's exactly right. And there's a significant opportunity. We've been working with libraries on co-location of the Williams Branch Library with that facility. I think it'll be an amazing neighborhood facility for the Air Park neighborhood. So we're very excited about that. I mentioned that multi-year funding on that park roadway rehabilitation program. We'll continue to do trail repair. The good news is most of the trail system is relatively young, so it's kind of patching and repair as need be without any major renovation. And then I also mentioned the Wilderness Park user experience improvements. And then I'm going to transition here to the golf budget. The Lincoln, you may know that the Lincoln City Golf Program is operated as an enterprise fund. So all the revenue that it generates goes to support both the operations of the golf facilities and then also the capital repair and replacement. And the golf fund budget is also on page 154. There's also a transfer identified there for the capital improvement program, and that's how you get to the $3.9 million. And so we've proposed some minor fee increases to generate enough revenue based on the 163,000 round projection to generate that $3.92 million. And we are reducing FTEs by just about 9/10 of an FTE within the golf program. And the level of services will continue to be the same. We'll continue to manage the 4 18-hole golf courses. We will continue to manage the 9-hole Ager golf course. And then we'll continue to offer player development programming for youth through adults. As I said, our target number of rounds is 163,000. We typically do a survey of golfers every year to get a sense of how they feel about their experience and the condition of the courses. And we get about an 83.2% satisfactory rating from doing that. One of the major challenges that we have with the Lincoln City Golf Program has been deferred capital repair and replacement. And what that really means is that we've deferred repairing irrigation systems because they're so expensive. The oldest irrigation system that we have is the system out at Pioneers Golf Course. And that system is about 35 years old at this point. Ideally, we'd be looking at repairing and replacing, or renovating, replacing irrigation systems on about a 25-year cycle. So that irrigation system is 10 years overdue. One of the things that we would like to start talking with the City Council about is we collect a surcharge for paying for the bond debt that paid for the new clubhouse out at out at Holmes Park. As we get that paid off in 2021, we'd like to talk to the council about the possibility of again issuing bond debt, about $1 million worth of bond debt that we would retire in the same way, and then direct that $1 million to getting the irrigation system out at Pioneers Golf Course replaced. And so that would give us an infusion of cash that we could take care of that irrigation system, and then we can continue to probably save for getting the other irrigation systems replaced. This is the Golf Capital Improvement Program. We go through the same process. We do a 10-year facilities plan for our golf courses. The facilities plan identifies that we have about a $470,000 annual need for repair and replacement. We have about $330,000 available, and I'll explain the other pie chart. That's where the $330,000 comes from. And so we have a gap of about $140,000 a year, and we've been working on strategies to try to close that gap. The funding that comes to the capital improvement program with the golf fund comes from about 4 different sources. We have cell towers on golf property that generate lease revenue of about $110,000. We have an advertising agreement with a company called Benchcraft that provides us $20,000 in cash that we put into the capital improvement program. The Holmes Clubhouse surcharge generates about $100,000 a year, typically a little bit more than that. And then we have a second CIP surcharge that generates another $100,000 a year. So that's how we get to the $330,000. And it's that Holmes Clubhouse surcharge that when the clubhouse bond is paid off, that we would recommend to the City Council and the golfing community that we keep that surcharge in place. The golfing public is used to paying that surcharge, and that we bond against that to replace the irrigation system at Pioneers. And so kind of the summary, what's important to know about this budget, I got asked that question this morning, that we're maintaining existing levels of service, and that people will not see a change in the level of service that we're providing to the community, that the usual incremental fee increases are included in the budget, and that we are deferring some capital repair and replacement projects to preserve services. We thought that was important. If you have to make a decision about services or deferring some capital repair and replacement, we think it's important to preserve services. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and it looks like I may have, I made it, but only because of the grace by starting early, I think.
Does anyone have any questions?
Lots.
Washington?
No, you go first. No.
All right, I'll try to ask only 3 questions. All right, so first, the Air Park Rec Center, I think that's a great project. But I also noticed that you had the director position in vacancy, as a vacancy savings for Air Park. Did I catch that correct?
Yeah, it's the assistant director position
The assistant.
that is being eliminated as part of this position. It is vacant at this point.
Okay.
We have a center director there. I know Holly is sitting in the room, and even with the mask on, I can tell that she would say that, particularly when we open that new building, we're absolutely going to need that assistant position.
I was curious if this was a 1 year or
Yeah.
forever. Golf rounds, with the pandemic, have you noticed a change in your golf rounds significantly? Do you expect the same kind of revenue this year? You don't have to answer. We're asking questions and they get noted, and
Okay.
you can answer them later. And then the rec center fees, I want to dig down just a smidge deeper. I know they're incremental, I know they're typical, they're normal, but I just feel like there's been so many hits economically to families. I am curious about which rec center fees, will it be the before and after school fees? And what's the jump, what's the actual change?
Do you want me to answer that, or do you want to wait? Because
You can send it
Okay,
to
I'm
us. If
happy
you
to do
happen
that.
to have it like off the top of your head, I'd take it. So anyway, those are the three things where I will just stop. I asked 3 questions.
Thank you.
Impressive.
Councilwoman Ward, did you have some questions? Oh, sorry, I didn't see it on there.
No, I'm good.
You're good?
Air Park.
Thank you.
You'll take care of Air Park for me,
Yeah.
won't you?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I just wanted to clarify, and first of all, thank you, Lynn, for explaining so well, first-time budget for me and some of us, what you intend to do to cut and then what we're still getting. That's really helpful to me. So my question is on the programs that serve the special populations. You said those would continue, right?
They will.
And it is sort of under the radar, I think, because as someone who's watched and worked for government my whole career, I didn't know until I went to those fabulous holiday events. So those fall under that category.
They do.
So given what our health measures are at that point, those will continue.
They will.
That makes me really happy. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. So, and that was 575,000 or 575 people?
575 different people are
Are
served.
served. That's
Yeah.
a lot of people with challenges that
It is.
get to do a lot of cool things. So, thank you. That's all I had.
Councilman Shob?
Nope, I'm good.
Roy, Jean? Awesome. Any other questions? Councilwoman Washington, do you have anything else you want to?
No, you know what, I'm gonna leave these, I'll talk to Lynn later.
Okay.
We
All
gotta
right.
go home, right?
Well, thank you so much for coming out, and
My
we'll be
pleasure.
in communication.
Great, thank you. And it's
So
my
much.
understanding, I'm supposed to go down one more slide. There we go.
Thank you for your attention.
All right, so that's all we had for today. Thanks everyone for your time and attention. If there's any questions for Brandon or John, we can follow up with them later. Otherwise, our next meeting will be, for budget briefings, will be June 23rd here at the City Council Chambers, where we'll go over LTU, police, fire, and health. We'll see you then.
Yay, us.
Thank you.